Now, I often get asked as a dividend growth investor that's been investing in the stock market for around 7 or so years now, if I could only invest into one single dividend growth ETF, which one would it be and why? Now, although there's many good dividend growth ETFs out there, things like the VU ETF, SCHD, for example, DGRW, etc., etc. For this specific example, at least, if I were able to only invest into one single dividend growth ETF in the year 2024, it would simply be DGRW, the Wisdom Tree US Quality Dividend Growth Fund. Now, in this video, we're going to dig deep into DGRW, show you exactly why this ETF, in my opinion, is one of the best, if not the best, dividend growth ETFs of all time. Then towards the end of the video, I'm going to share with you my actual 7-figure dividend growth portfolio and explain to you my strategy moving forward, which includes buying a lot of DGRW. Now, if this interests you at all, make sure to please drop a like down below, subscribe, and let's get into it. I just finished my brand new dividend investing ebook where I share exactly how I went from 0 to now over 7 figures invested, and also on how I earned more than $6,000 per month in dividends. I also finished my custom dividend tracker that you can use to track your dividend income progress on an ongoing basis. So make sure to grab yourself a copy of my dividend investing ebook and the new dividend tracker today. It's the first link in my description. Now, of course, investors can argue what really makes the perfect dividend ETF the perfect dividend ETF, but for the most part, these are the things I look for. Now, for starters, I want a dividend paying ETF that has a fair starting dividend yield. Now, what I mean by that is that even if it's not the highest starting yield, as long as it's something that's going to give investors a decent amount of cash flow from day one, I definitely consider that an important metric, although it's not the most important to me. Next, the perfect dividend ETF has to have some strong dividend growth. Especially for a long-term buy and hold investor like myself, I want to be investing into different ETFs and stocks that are going to pay me more and more over time. And honestly, to me, this might be one of the most important metrics of all. Next, this so-called perfect dividend ETF is also going to need to have strong price return long-term. Now, this just basically means that over time, historically at least, the ETF has grown in share price, which in part is going to most likely grow your net worth long-term as long as you buy and hold. Now, last but not least, the perfect dividend ETF is going to need to have an A+ top 10 holdings. Now, ETFs, of course, are made up of a bunch of different stocks, and even if within the basket of stocks, not every single position is your favorite, the top 10 holdings need to be considered what I call A+, meaning that you would be very happy to basically hold on to every single one of these holdings individually if you had to. So first things first, going over some of the basics, what is DGRW? A lot of you guys watching this video have definitely probably heard of DGRW. For sure have heard of things like SCHD and VU, but DGRW isn't talked about as much, and because of this, I think a lot of dividend growth investors could be missing out. But right here on the Wisdom Tree website, it says DGRW, the Wisdom Tree US Quality Dividend Growth Fund, seeks to track the investment results of dividend-paying large-cap companies with growth characteristics. Now, for dividend growth investors pretty much across the board, when it comes to investing into a high-quality ETF, for an ETF to meet the criteria to be able to invest into, they need to offer multiple attributes. And DGRW specifically crosses every single thing off. For one, this ETF has grown substantially over time. Since around 2013, the ETF has basically tripled in share price. Now, although price return is not the only thing that dividend growth investors look for, it is of course very important because over time for dividend growth investors like myself, we're looking to use mostly the dividends that are paid from these ETFs to live off of in the future, but we still want our overall assets to grow over time. And DGRW has definitely done so. Now, DGRW does have maybe one negative thing when it comes to this ETF. And I hate to break it to you, but it's the expense ratio at a 0.28% expense ratio. Now, 0.28% is sort of an expensive expense ratio considering this ETF does offer a lot of similar things to other dividend growth ETFs like SCHD, DGRW, and like VU that all have below a 0.1% expense ratio. So DGRW is going to be on the higher end when it comes to expense ratio, but we're going to show you later that the total return makes up for it. Now, as you see in the title of the video, I explained that this ETF would be the one and only ETF that I'd buy in 2024 as a new dividend growth investor. And one of the main reasons being for this is because of the holding breakdown. DGRW does have a majority of the portfolio in technology stocks, which I think in 2024 and beyond, technology stocks are going to continue to rise, especially if the Fed does start to cut interest rates from this year on moving forward. And with DGRW giving you so much exposure to technology, you're getting a top 10 holdings of things like Microsoft, Apple, AbbVie, you're getting Johnson & Johnson, Broadcom, the Home Depot. You're getting around 300 different companies, but again, the majority of the ETF is made up of things like Microsoft and Apple. So because DGRW's holdings are made up the way they are, when interest rates are going to get cut sometime this year, and then of course onwards into 2025, I think a lot of these top 10 holdings are going to benefit greatly. And I think we could definitely see DGRW at all-time highs very soon here. Now, as a 31-year-old investor, I do personally want some of my portfolio to have some exposure to some higher beta names, which are of course often found in the technology sector. But the main reason, especially for me being a long-term dividend growth investor that is looking to buy into ETFs, to not buy for a year, not 2 years, not 5 years, I'm looking to buy into certain parts of my portfolio and hold on to these names forever. And I'm being completely serious when I say that. The shares that I have right now of SCHD in my portfolio, around 500 or so shares, I'm truthfully looking to hold on to these shares forever. There are some holdings in my portfolio, of course, that I'm not looking to hold on to forever. I buy and sell names out of my portfolio on a monthly basis. But that being said, for certain names, I'm looking to buy and hold forever, and DGRW is one of them. Now, we talked about the fact that when it comes to picking out a dividend growth ETF, growth is very important as far as price return goes, but also dividend and dividend growth rate is very, very important. Because like I mentioned earlier, as a dividend growth investor, for me personally, I'm looking to pretty much keep all my assets as is and live off the dividends paid from the assets, not ever touching the principal, hopefully. Now, with DGRW trading pretty much near the all-time high as of right now, the dividend yield is pretty low at around 1.72% more or less. But over the long term, DGRW's dividend growth has been pretty significant. Over the 10-year CAGR, 15.43%. Not to mention, another cool aspect about DGRW is the fact that this ETF does pay a dividend monthly. So although it doesn't really make too much of a difference whether or not you own a stock or ETF that pays a dividend, let's say monthly or quarterly, for investors like myself, like I mentioned for the third time, that want to someday live off their dividends, it's going to definitely come in handy getting paid dividends on a monthly basis because, again, bills normally come once every month. Now, for a more visual aspect of DGRW's dividend growth over the long term, you can see that for the most part, this ETF has been paying more and more over time. And although, of course, there are stocks and ETFs out there with a little bit quicker dividend growth, DGRW's dividend growth has been pretty significant. The starting dividend yield isn't all that bad. And the cherry on top is the fact that DGRW's price return has been great over the long term. Next, I want to show you guys how much an investor would have made if they bought $10,000 worth of DGRW, and this is back in May of 2013 to around current date, which is just over 10.5 years. So if an investor would have invested $10K into DGRW and reinvested the dividends along the way, they would have ended up with $35.4 thousand, or a total return of 254+%, which is an average annual total return of 12.60%, which is not too bad whatsoever. And although across the market, there's of course other investment vehicles that offer say 8 to 12% as well, the fact that DGRW does offer a decent starting dividend yield and the fact that it pays dividends on a monthly basis is a selling point, especially for dividend growth investors that want to maybe dig into their dividends a little bit before retirement. And for an example off of that, if an investor were to not have reinvested their dividends and spent them along the way, they still would have had an 11.66% total return averaged out annually, which is still very, very impressive. Now, lastly, I promised that I would show you guys my actual long-term dividend growth portfolio. This right here is a dividend tracker which shows every position. And as you can see here, if you look closely, there's not any DGRW in it yet. And that's because throughout the first half of this year, I'm planning on building out this position right here, the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF, SCHD, and I'm trying to build out this position to 1,000 shares as quickly as possible. Now, after I get to 1,000 shares of SCHD, I plan on buying DGRW on a daily basis. And of course, my strategy can change over time. But as of right now, DGRW is in my sight. And I'm definitely excited to build on my DGRW position moving forward towards the second half of this year. Lastly, I thought it'd be interesting if we stacked up DGRW next to the gold standard, the S&P 500, on the 3-year time frame. Just to give you an idea on how good DGRW has performed over multiple different times, DGRW has almost a 36% return, where S&P almost has a 24% return. Now, don't get me wrong, either way, S&P 500, DGRW, VU, etc., etc. There's so many good ETFs out there. You really can't mess up as long as you stay with something that's quality. But either way, it does go to show that DGRW has even beat the S&P 500 over multiple time frames. Which is why if you are a dividend growth investor, you're looking for something that pays dividends, but also something that has the potential to grow an ETF price consistently over time, DGRW is definitely an ETF that you should look into. All that to say that now I want to hear from you guys down below when it comes to DGRW, or when it comes to your #1 buy and hold dividend growth ETF that you've been buying throughout 2024 so far. Which ETF is it? Drop the ticker symbol in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to please drop a like in it and subscribe for more future content like this. Thanks as always for stopping by, and if you are interested in investing, make sure to check out these recent videos I posted right here.